So we're going to have, I hope, a spirited conversation on stage, but we're also going to hopefully get lots of great questions from you guys, so you can start thinking about them even now, which you probably already have. But we'll start on stage, and I'll ask you guys a question. So I think one of the interesting things that's happened since the election is that almost from the moment the results were announced, there were a flood of analyses about what happened. And every pundit had something to say about it. And I think before we start talking about where we're going to go next, what do you think we've gotten wrong already in terms of how we've analyzed this event?
I think it's the opposite, because I think everything is right. Like, it's just it's a classic example of causal overdetermination. It's 80,000 votes across 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. 80,000 votes out of, 115 million cast. I forget what the sort of final number is. So it's actually a perfect setup for an endless fight about cause.
Right.
Because you can list 40 theories, all of which are true, and everyone can spend all day on Twitter arguing that they're like, no, it was the Russians, no, it was Comey, no, it was that she never went to Michigan and Wisconsin, no, it was racist backlash, no, it was devastation of economic anxiety, of trade policy, no, it was gendered backlash, and all of that was true. every explanation for the outcome is true, and and flip 40,000 votes across the greater industrial Midwest, and this whole event is very different.
Right. Or do you think there's a danger, though, of overinterpretation that we've maybe already seen a bit of?
Yeah.
Yeah, Rebecca, please.
Yeah, and one of the things that I found during the election, perhaps it got especially intense in the last few months. I mean, one of the lessons that I've drawn from this is that we should really talk a little less about our assuredness about what we know and more about what we're not sure of. And this is a pattern. I've actually noticed when I've been on Chris's show a couple times, there have been answers where Chris has asked something and I've said, I don't know, in response, because I don't. That's a very hard. We now encourage people to behave as if they know, and part of that comes out of the ways that the media has grown, right? So the poll aggregators and the Nate Silver and Nate Cohn, all of whom I respect the work they do tremendously, but we're relying on some kind of punditry or polling analysis or the media to tell us what's going to happen. I mean, we saw that in 2012 with the keep calm and trust Nate Silver, and even the he's got this, right? We want to be assured in a time, I think we've been living through a period, as is now more easily discernible to millions of people, that has been a very tremendous uncertainty and anxiety and social, political, and economic shifts. And I think that we have naturally turned to people who can explain it all to us and tell us what's going to happen and predict the future with a confidence we can rely on, which is why I, like everybody else, I mean, it was 538, refresh, for 6 months. I mean,
or that insane deranged thing on election night on the New York Times. It was going like that.
And I think we saw that similar impulses, and I've certainly encountered them immediately, as it was happening. On election night, I was getting tweets from people with whom I'd argued over the course of the election saying, see, I was right. Which is a human impulse also in the face of shock and dismay to say, to justify, to use the event to justify your own position. But I think actually, that spirit of, I know exactly what happened, this is it, is what we need to steer away from right now. We need to remind ourselves, and I also think this was discernible even in 2008. I remember lots of people who'd covered lots of elections talking about you can't ever trust the youth vote, look at what happened with McGovern, the kids never come out to vote, and then Barack Obama was the candidate and young people came out to vote. And one of the things we have to acknowledge is that we are no longer moving in this country in a way that our models are changing dramatically, right? We'd never had a candidate like Barack Obama. We had never, frankly, had a candidate like Hillary Clinton or, by some measures, like Donald Trump.
Yeah, by a lot of measures.
And so we can't, right, so we can't use historical barometers when the models, the individuals were different, but.
The one defense I will make, and I think this has to be said, of Nate Silver is, I believe, was it a day before where he was like, listen, this is just probability. I think whatever they had it up there, it was like, Donald Trump had a 30% chance to win, whatever it was. He was like, that's a real thing. You know what I mean? And people really need to take that, seriously. I think your point in general is correct, but I'm just saying specifically.
Yeah, no, and I really respect their work, and I think it's exciting and fascinating, but I think in part it's about how we rely on it, too.
Right.
It's not
it's more
so much
about
what
us
they're
and
doing.
how we,
But the question for me is, do I care about all the reasons equally? And I actually don't. I care about, I care about the reasons that reveal some kind of structural problem in our democracy that affects people who are at the margins. Because whatever is the outcome of the election, the people who are going to have the least control in how it plays out in their lives are the people who have the least voice and the least power. So those are the people that I care about. And so among the list of things, whether she was a good candidate, should she have gone to Michigan and all that stuff, for me, and I see it getting lost in the narrative, is this issue of voter suppression, of the deliberate attempt to keep people in particular places from voting because of who you think they're going to vote for, is like a seriously corrosive problem in our democracy. And even if Hillary had won, I wouldn't be like saying, well, I'm not going to keep litigating voter suppression cases. Like that.
But to me, that's a perfect example of the paradox by which we've now entered into the post-debate, which is that people are using the causal explanation to wage whatever ideological warfare on their first principles they already believe.
Yes.
So it's like, it may or may not be the case that there's a strong causal argument to be made that voter suppression determined the outcome in, say, and I've seen data that goes in each direction when you compare, say, Milwaukee to Detroit with very different legal structures in case. But the point is that that's first order bad and should be fought independent of the causal role, but we are using the argument about the cause to wage that ideological battle about priority.
I spent election day in Alabama, and there were people who were saying, why? It's not a swing state. Well, so first of all, I don't do partisan politics. I do civil rights, right? And people in Alabama are voting not just for the president, right? They're voting for the county commission. They're voting for the probate judge, who, when I called him about the one voting machine in the black polling place, told me, don't you worry about it. I know better. That guy, right? They're voting for him. They're voting for the county commission, they're voting for the school board, they're voting for the water district, they're voting for all these other offices for people who control their lives.
That's right.
And so the idea that we're only focused on Michigan and Wisconsin and so forth because it's only about the presidential election, no, it's actually about democratic participation. And if something's threatening that, regardless of the outcome of the presidential race, even if the presidential race had gone entirely the opposite way, it wouldn't change the fact that 250,000 people in Alabama don't have the voter ID that they are now requiring to vote. And I think that's the part of the post-mortem that's bothering me, is that we're not paying any attention to those kind of structural democratic issues, and we're focusing instead on the candidates and what
I think the other thing is and I frankly completely agree with the over-analysis. I think that's true. At the same time, it's worth widening the question a little bit and asking, why did it even come down to this? How did it even come down to this?
Why was it close?
Right, why was it close? How is it that, raising, an openly racist, campaign that begins in birtherism, it's the first thing, begins in birtherism. Why was that not disqualifying? Why was, a tape coming out, where somebody is bragging about, sexual assault not disqualifying? Why is literally being on stage with someone, sizing her up, and then bragging about it, literally sexually harassing someone during the debate, why is this not disqualifying?
But those.
And I could, obviously.
And the list goes on.
Right, and the list goes on.
But those things, and I've been thinking a lot about Trump, and I argued during the campaign, and I don't know if it's right or not, that Trump's candidacy happened in response and in anticipation of running against Hillary Clinton, who was running after 2 terms of Barack Obama, right? So I don't think it's coincidental or like a quirk that in the year we were running for the 3rd term of a non-white male president, not to mention 2 candidates who, especially by the time Hillary Clinton got to the general, were sort of promising to work toward policy reforms and legislation that was going to benefit and further empower non-white Americans, and specifically non-white men, that I don't think it's, a quirk that the man who was selected by his party to run against that candidate was this kind of he was like some fever dream and now he's our president. He was like a fever dream of these impulses, which are very American impulses, right? This is, we like to tell ourselves, and we like to tell ourselves because there is a black family in the White House, and we know this, everybody in this room knows this, that this is a lie that we tell ourselves, but we tell ourselves that these fights are over, we've grown, we've moved forward, we know we haven't, but this is what America's built on, is racism and sexism and celebrity. Donald Trump is America. Right. And so this idea, Hillary Clinton was taking, and her campaign strategy, which was to point out what you just pointed out, like this guy, like that was, and if I,
that was her campaign strategy.
That was her campaign strategy.
Like seriously, this dude.
Seriously, this guy. And,
this guy.
And that turns out to have been a terrible strategic error because
you were like,
this guy.
Yes, that dude.
Right. A lot of people thought it was going to work.
She was taking a stupidly optimistic bet on America.
Right.
Well, it's interesting now.
But a lot of people also thought it was going to, like a lot of people thought, yes, that's a great idea. A lot of Republicans, in fact, shifted over. Yes,
that's right. They ran away from him after the tape.
She was not alone in her opt. I think a lot of us wanted to.
Well, what's wrong with the fact that we believed? I mean, and to be honest, this is one of the most traumatic and I think dangerous parts of this election. You're absolutely right. This country was founded, genocide of Native Americans, racism, and so forth, and all of you have written about the structures of American life that have produced, what we see today. But one thing we did do was that we had created and tried to live up to a set of norms, and those norms. We all live with norms. Norms are important. It's not a law that keeps you from just drinking out of my glass, right? It's just like politeness and a norm. Do you know what I mean? And we all function that way, right? Somebody has their arm on your chair right now, and then they move it, and that's kind of how we live as a society. So we do have norms about racism. I mean, we have norms about misogyny. We have laws, absolutely, but really, we're very reliant on norms. So there's no law against hiring a white supremacist to be your chief strategist as the president. It's just kind of not done, right? So, and there's nothing wrong with us thinking that we can rely on that. That was the Hillary thing, like this guy. Right. Every norm, forget about the law, every norm that we believe in, this guy violates it in the most vulgar way. And I don't think
not just
wrong.
We should just be clear, and not just we as like, oh, we liberals, or we the people in this room, like, look, 1 week in, he mocked John McCain for being a POW, and people thought the campaign was over. Republicans all said, like, you can't do that.
That's what I'm saying. So I think this is a dangerous moment that we have to take account of. And I've been trying to write about this, about why law is going to become so important, because we do have a president who doesn't care about norms, doesn't care about ethics. That's the other soft thing. Like there's some things you don't do because it's just not ethical. Nobody told you can't do it, and it's not illegal, but you just wouldn't do it. He's not bound by that stuff. And we're not prepared, actually, to deal with this, to deal with somebody who has that much power, who is not willing to respect any of these norms or ethics. And
can I just ask a quick question about that? Because it's not just him who doesn't respect the norms. It's presumably the people who voted for him as well. Like there's
and also the people working with him right now.
Yes.
And the people working with him.
In the Congress.
And exactly, and the Congress. And one thing that's been shocking to me is, during the election, I would sometimes read, the National Review or, Red State or these sort of conservative websites, and to see how quickly they've all fallen in line after the election, after being so full of, morality and never Trump, and now they're like, okay, maybe Trump, Trump's okay. So what is it that what has happened over the last 8 years where these norms, that has caused these norms to fall apart? Like,
I don't know what that could be.
Among the population. It's a mystery.
I mean, this is different.
You say 8 years.
I mean, aren't we learning this crucial lesson about this country, which is we are apparently willing to blow up all those norms all the things that we sort of and norms that we believe to be part of our moral structure, right? The ethics stuff. I mean, that's part of how we conceive of our democracy, even if it's not exactly encoded in a way, and some of it is, and I think he's violating it. But that when it comes to a panic about really what felt, I think, to a lot of people like a revolt, there are a couple moments from the conventions that were really key to me that stood out. And one of them was Rudy Giuliani in his I mean, woo,
I love him.
Big fans here.
Rudy Giuliani, ladies and gentlemen.
Big fans.
But he said this incredible thing, and I was like, yep, this is it right now. He said, this is the last election. There's not going to be another election. You should go back and watch this. It's in the middle of his crazy, Il Duce thing. He says, this is our last chance. There's not going to be another election. The view was, and it's for a lot of reasons. It's Hillary Clinton, and she's going to carry on the Obama legacy. The racism and the sexism were completely threaded together. We cannot separate them in the way that people were talking about them as a unit, in the way they were presenting themselves as a unit, hugging each other on stage. There's rarely been a president who campaigned more enthusiastically for his successor than Barack Obama. Michelle Obama was the sort of heart and voice of Hillary Clinton's campaign in the last few months. And that we cannot underestimate how terrifying and threatening that was. And plus, the people they were relying on to elect her.
I also do think there was, I think there's two things that have contributed to this sort of, aside from, two other things to add to the conversation about why these norms have been unwound. One is that partisanship is just one of the most powerful forces in American life, and I would run this thought experiment with friends of mine who were liberals during the election when I felt actually I genuinely admired the conservatives who were never Trumpers, because I think it's actually quite hard to do that. And my thing would be, all right, the election's going to come down to Ted Cruz. The Republicans nominate Ted Cruz, and the Democrats nominate Kanye West. Who are you going to vote for?
I'm not voting for Kanye West.
That's the correct answer. That's the correct answer. Right. But that would be really hard.
You're right.
Ask yourself, are you going to walk in that booth? Are you going to pull it for Ted Cruz?
It was third-party candidate. I'd vote for Jill Stein.
Right. Or you right. Okay.
In a minute. In a second over Kanye.
But my point,
you don't get that out. Don't give him a trap.
My point about that is, we are trained.
Kanye West?
Yeah. Okay, but no.
He said Kanye West. He didn't say
Cruz.
No, I'm not. Kanye West
that's the right answer.
And met with Donald Trump.
That's right. But I'm saying even before that meeting, that is the correct answer. Kanye West, who is a brilliant musician, let me just note,
right. Yeah.
should not be within 1,000 miles of the nuclear codes, obviously. Right?
And neither should Ted Cruz, but you could say he's the United States Senator.
That's exactly right.
He's a lawyer. He was the Attorney General of Texas. He was a Supreme Court clerk. He had the
That's right. And so this question of where the rubber hits the road on these norms, part of the undoing is that ultimately, remember, one of the bets the Clinton campaign was making, which I think was undone by the Comey letter, was that there was enough people in that Never Trump camp to come over to her that were going to sort of buck this partisan trend. The other thing I will say, and I know that this is the most sort of chewed over part of this whole economic anxiety stuff, I do think there's a large segment of American population, for a very complicated set of reasons, white people, white working class, white non-college, however you want to call it, who have come to view essentially imperatives about social justice as elite manners. Okay? They have come to interpret them like the way that we would mock someone oh, you used the wrong spoon at the fancy dinner. They understand, people I have talked to, I'm not saying they in some general sense, I mean people I have communicated with about this, understanding his violation of what we're calling norms, which to me, are deeply important to human equity and dignity, you don't grab people against their will, that those norms are essentially the 2016 American version of which fork you use at the fancy tea party. And for the guy to come in, people who have a lot of resentment, that is both racial resentment, gender resentment, and class resentment, all stacked atop each other, and for the guy to come in and just be I'm not using that fork. Right. And it's but people liked it. People will say, Michelle Goldberg wrote about this, and the Trump voters I took to 2 days ago in Kenosha, they didn't vote for Donald Trump in spite of how he acted. They voted for him because of how he acted. They liked the norm violating. They liked the stuff that he was doing that was disqualifying.
But I can't say that's a mistaken calculation on their part. I mean, amongst a great number of liberals, that's how we talk about it. That rhetoric is divisive.
Totally.
Not,
Right, it is uncouth.
Uncouth, you know what I mean? It's like we talk about like racism and sexism when people
like
say
manners.
things as though it's manners, as though it's like impolite, as though it's manners at our heart, not like it's, allocation of resources or
That's
anything
totally
like that.
true.
I'm not saying that would be more successful, but the conclusion that it's manners is not entirely incorrect.
That's a really good point.
Well, I actually do think it would be more successful, not necessarily with the people that you were talking about, but even for us, because I do think that we suffer from it would give us clarity about what actually we're fighting for, and to the extent we're fighting over emotions and over feelings, which is a really stupid thing to fight over with strangers, right?
Right.
You can't ever win, and I've been trying to talk about policy. As being about investments, and that racism expresses itself as investments, and not just financial, but just all the ways that we make investments in things in our society. So for me, when I encounter people who give me the elite thing, which is just really, I have to say, stunned me, I would say beginning maybe about 8 years ago, but maybe even before then, because I'm the youngest of 10 kids, right? Everything that my family was able to achieve was this the crazy determination of just crazy hardworking black people who are like, this is gonna happen. Do you know what I mean? Like just, ugh. And so to me, the idea that you achieve this thing, that you go to college and you go to law school and you have a family and you want to give back and all this stuff, and that it's viewed as some kind of weird, which spoon do you use, was kind of astonishing to me. And so I think it's partly because the way we talk about success and the way we talk about what it means to climb the ladder, and when we talk about what it means to get a college education, is we make it sound like it's some nice thing that we do for some nice person, instead of all of this is an investment in the whole society. And there was a time, I mean, we're in New York, we're like, there's no place that investment was made more. You know who were the most like crazy, racist, awful people were the people who controlled New York in the 1920s and 30s. When people were immigrating from Ireland and from Italy, and they thought these people are dirty and they have diseases and they're dumb and they're gonna just ruin the city. And so you know what we better do? We better make public parks where they can go to. We better really get our sewer system together so that we don't spread disease. We need public education so these people will at least be educated. Like the decision, they were no less like racist and nationalistic, but the decision was we will counter that with a set of investments that are going to better our entire society. And out of that came the things that a whole generation, including my family, came to be able to enjoy, to go to public parks and so forth. We've just made a different decision today about how we're going to respond to those same impulses. And that's because they're focused on feelings and not on how do you deal with how you invest in a society.
I mean, even the phrase like diversity, I mean, it just sounds like, like this kind of soft, well, it would be nice to have, a lot of people who look different. Isn't that nice? Isn't that appealing? And it's like it's the softest reading. I don't want to blame the civil rights movement, but it's the softest reading of the civil rights movement.
Let me just give
I'm not saying that is the civil rights movement.
I'm going to actually back you up a little bit on this. I was actually doing a talk at the public library this week about diversity, and I have to say, in this climate, it felt like a weird conversation to be having. But the world's coming to an end. But here's the thing. But here's why it actually, and you're right to place a little bit of blame. What I talked about was about Brown versus Board of Education, seminal 1954 case, desegregating schools, and about the way in which we came to talk about integration and this issue of diversity, which always sounds like the conferring of good, positive things on black people, on black children.
Right.
And we all know the doll test that the brilliant social psychologist did, Kenneth and Mamie Clark, where black children chose the white doll, and it showed the way in which segregation hurt the self-esteem of black kids. But the great thing about working at the organization I work at is that I have all the original documents. The actual social science brief that was signed by 31 social scientists and submitted in that case did talk about the harm that segregation as a form of white supremacy, designed to send a message that it did harm the self-esteem of black children. But there's a whole section in that paper that's about the way in which segregation harms white children. And that was never discussed in the case. It was never discussed by the Supreme Court, and it's never been part of our conversation about what that whole project was supposed to be about. And now we're living with the consequences of it.
The point of that, which I think is so profound, is that the fundamental question in the election, in a certain way, the subtext of it, beneath all of things happening around gender and race was, is it all zero-sum or not? Because what stronger together means is it's not zero-sum and we can all get some. And Donald Trump said, oh, no.
Right.
No, it is straight up zero-sum, and I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna cut you a bigger slice of the pie, you. And you know who you are, because I'm on your side. And that was the ground upon which it was fought. And if Democrats or people on the left or liberals don't have an argument about politics being who gets what, about power, right? Then you end up with politics about elite manners, politics about
Well, Rebecca wrote an interesting piece about the whole idea of identity politics and how, and something that we've talked about many times, how identity politics, what people call identity politics, are really, actually economic issues.
Of course, yes.
There's a whole other way of framing these.
Right. Well, and you see this resentment, it's fascinating because you see the resentment playing out both on right and left. And one of the things that's interesting, I think the thing about the elite manners and the way we talk about diversity is 100% true, and that we have to get better about allocating resources, but we also can't leave aside the part about the perceptions of who has power over other people. And so that's why it matters that Barack Obama's in the White House, the threat of Hillary Clinton being in the White House. I have said that I should have known when Beyonce performed at the Country Music Awards with the Dixie Chicks 5 days before, and the country music fans were so angry that they actually forced CMT to take it off the website. Now you imagine you have a clip of Beyonce performing with the Dixie Chicks. It's the most traffic you've ever had in your entire life. And men, I don't know who was angry. Somebody was angry. I don't know who was angry. But
it rhymes with pen.
But the economics, the thing about the identity, we use these code words. Somebody told me the other day that it was special interests when she was in school, right? It was the special interest groups.
Yes.
And there is this resentment in part that these things, and you can find this on the left too, obviously, I mean, that's part of what I was responding to with that piece, that these special interests have too much power. You could feel that in the primary with the complaints coming from some quarters that the southern states had too much power when in fact they didn't, they weren't going to go blue in the general election. So now what resentment is that about the southern states having too much power in the primary? What kind of resentment is it about, you could hear it in the way that a lot of people on the left talked about Hillary Clinton and her establishment support from NARAL or Planned Parenthood, people who are, organizations that are certainly Washington establishment, right? But that on the front lines of fighting an extremely precarious and dangerous fight for economic
because that's
opportunity and parity,
that's
right?
what it is.
And so when you hear people now in the postmortem diagnostically saying it was, there was too much focus from the Clinton campaign or from her supporters on these special interests or identity politics or political correctness or whatever the word you're using as the code, and that was alienating to people. It was alienating to people. That is true. But it's also about this perception that those interests, which are about individual people having too much power, and that we haven't done a good job ever on the right or the left in explaining that those special interests are not just sort of, they're not personal, they're not social. Abortion is not about sex and religion. Abortion is about economic opportunity and equality.
And dignity, and the dignity.
And dignity, right. And we've always been bad. I mean, this is a fight that I know probably lots of people in this room, again, have also been fighting for a long time to make it clear that these are what, it's true about, everything. Gay rights, it's true about criminal justice. This is the impact of incarceration, not only on the incarcerated, but on the incarcerated's families. This is everything that you do. And I know that Ta-Nehisi and Eric Levitz, a colleague of mine, had a back and forth about the way that Hillary framed this during the campaign. Hillary herself, who said not everything's about an economic theory. And the point is we need to combine this understanding. Bernie Sanders did it too. He said in 2015 in a Rolling Stone interview, once we get past the social issues, that's another way we talk about it, culture war or social issues, once we get past abortion, gun control, gay rights, we can find common ground with the right on economic issues. Everybody's guilty of it, this separation, and in fact, these things are all intermingled in ways that we have to get better about making clear.
Right, now, that brings me to something else I wanted to ask you all about, because you're all, I'm sorry. That's great. Because you're all in various ways advocates in various ways and storytellers, absolutely. Has there been, again, over this last period of time, some failure in the way we tell these stories? Now, I was reading Chris's new book, and you have this this anecdote you tell about being in Ferguson, and there being this moment when the police, let the protesters protest, and there was a kind of jubilant protest that sort of broke out, completely nonviolent, but there was clear disorder in the streets, and that there was a certain part even of you that was like, this is making me anxious that there's this kind of disorder, and that is a story that gets told, as you understood it, to the rest of white America as this is chaos. It's all coming to an end because the streets are snarled and people are walking in the middle of the road. Is there some way that we have to change the way we tell stories so that we can reach people who respond when they hear about so-called identity issues in negative and hostile ways?
I think that's a really important question, and I think it gets to the sort of deepest issue, or in some ways both the deepest and most mundane, which is this issue of like political power and who has it where. So my answer to that circles back to the first question about understanding the election, because I think one thing that's important to do is there's all these fluky things about the election, right? Like my favorite thought experiment, and by favorite I mean most depressing, is to just flip the timing of the Access Hollywood tape and the Comey letter. It's like there was no reason those two things happened when they did, except like total random chance. But like if you flip them,
and the Russians,
right? But I mean, but even just like forget that, like just take those two events, like and just flip the timing, and like the outcome's obviously different, right? So. But what you have to do is separate that from the broader facts about the Democratic Party in the age of Obama, which is that it's been eviscerated. They've lost 1,000 state legislative seats. There are 17 governorships. There is no way in which you can say that Democratic Party power across huge swaths of the country has not really, really decayed. And it's decayed in a lot of the places that were the, quote, blue wall that then fell, right? We saw a sort of Republican assault in Michigan. The reason there were voting rights problems in Wisconsin is because the Republicans were able to take over Wisconsin. Ohio as well. And that has to do with the stories Democrats are able to tell in different parts of the country. Mahoning County in Ohio, like, it's tough to tell a stronger together story in Mahoning County. Mahoning County is like 94% white, I think. Like the story there about the bright, multiracial, cosmopolitan future of American pluralist democracy is not a story with a lot of traction. It just isn't, like, because that place doesn't have that happening there. And I do think that the dominant messages that come from the Democratic Party, which are grounded in these really important commitments to multiracial democracy and gender equity and all of the sort of things that we're talking about, there has to be stories about what the Democratic Party are that are different in different places.
Wait, I just want to push back just a tiny bit,
No, please.
No, because it's actually a
question.
It's a question. There are women who live there.
No, I agree.
You know what I mean? Like, they're actually, and by which I don't mean like women are naturally democratic. I mean there are women who actually need reproductive rights. Like there's a story to tell.
I totally agree.
But that story, that's a story we're going to be able to tell differently, I'm afraid, in 4 years.
But then, so what is the answer to that, right? So that's a great point.
I don't know. That's what
I've been thinking about this in sort of racial terms because there are so many. When part of the, like, this is a bizarre thing to say, but part of what happened on election night was like, there's a lot of white people in America.
Right.
Well,
it turns out like that.
Chris,
maybe we lost sight of that.
Chris, there should be an Obamacare story to tell there too. Like there should be other things. I mean, I don't want to get too focused on because I mean that's the story Barack Obama has actually been telling.
But when you read the article about what people thought about, I don't know.
That Sarah Spliff article in Vox. Everyone should read that piece.
About what white people thought about Obamacare, and it was actually working for them, but still somehow thinking it would never, even if they voted against Hillary, that the Republicans would never get rid of Obamacare because there's 20 million of us on it. They just won't do it, even though they're saying it. I think this is a great question about like what stories we tell and can we tell different stories in different places. I'm riveted by the idea of storytelling, and I think one of the problems we have in this country is that even the Democrats are addicted to a story of nostalgia. Mm-hmm. So the story is always about, like, even if you're going to be in that place, it's about the jobs that are going to come, and maybe it's not going to be coal, but it's going to be the wind. It's like the same. It's kind of like this, and I don't think we can change this on the dime. I don't think you can just say like, well, in 2020 we're just going to tell a different story in a different way. I think we've so wedded ourselves over the last 25, 30 years, we've been so lazy that we have kept recycling a story that, if we're honest, we can be mad about Trump saying "Make America Great Again," but kind of the Democrats like that story too. There was some time when it was kind of like better, and there were jobs, and you could have a high school diploma, and America was America. We all watched the same program on Sunday. You know what I mean? Like we do it with the media. Like, remember when media used to be like? My father used to scream at the television. Yeah, there's a nostalgia.
My dad was able to put two kids in college.
And until we abandon or shed that story, which deliberately papers over the reality of what was happening to women, the reality of racism, the reality of misogyny, the reality of homophobia, all that stuff that was papered over for even within the African American community for the purposes of this nostalgic story. Right. We can't create a new story. How we do that?
But how do you win?
How we do that?
But the other thing about that is that all of that is true. It does paper over those things, and also it's gotten worse in Mahoning County. Like, so to
genuinely, yeah.
It's genuinely gotten worse. Like, the lot of people in Mahoning County, Ohio, is not better now than it was 10 or 20 years ago.
But do you think that they can take the truth? This is.
Who can? Can any of us?
Okay, so as we look for how to tell stories, we could make up a new fantasy and try to tell that to get votes. But I'm serious about this. Is there an appetite? I mean, I think Ta-Nehisi, you're the case for reparations and describing how segregated housing happened and what happened in Chicago, and and many people have responded very positively to it. It's a truth that needs to be told and that people need to begin to integrate. But I fear that we're casting about for another story that tries to elide the truth. Now, I'm not one of the people that believes. In fact, I get quite impatient with naming things and putting it on the table and all that stuff. Like, I just want to get on with it. You know what I mean? So I don't want to just spend a whole lot of time saying everybody needs to do a history lesson and so forth. But the truth about jobs, the truth about the global economy, the truth about why jobs aren't coming to that community, the truth that the factory's not coming back. Donald Trump could tell people a story that sounded good. I'm going to save your job. I mean, you can't be.
He literally said we're going to open back up the coal mines. That is a quote.
I mean, that's crazy. But is there a story that counters that people can absorb, that is the truth about what can happen in their lives? I don't know.
Becca?
Well, I feel like I have one micro version of a new kind of story that I saw Hillary Clinton tell. It's very specific, and it was specific to my interests. But I spent some time with her on the campaign trail, mostly at the end of the primary season, going into the general, then some after that. And she was not a good storyteller. However, she, the stuff about she should have talked about this policy, she was talking about policy all day, every day. Her speeches were about policy. Yes. And there was an aspect that I was particularly interested in because I've written a book about unmarried women. She would tell these crowds, when she was talking specifically about paid leave policy, subsidized daycare, raising the wages of caregivers for elder care and child care. She would tell this policy story, and it was a policy story. I'm not advertising it as a great communicative strategy. But it was a vision of a different America. She would say in her speeches, we don't live the way we used to live anymore. We have single parent families, we have single mothers, we need to support them. This is the number of single women who are working. She would, And it was fascinating to hear that. But let me tell you, as soon as I would leave that room, wherever she was telling that story, and it would work with the crowd. Now, I was at her rallies. These were her people who were listening to her, so there's no way to look around a crowd. It's like, what if Hillary went to that crowd that you were with at Bernie? I mean, let's never do that. But
I would love, that would be amazing.
Well, no, but if she told the crowd of Trump voters, this is what I want to do to cap your child care costs at 10%, and paid leave and raise your wages and because she was saying a lot of that stuff. Now, in part it was about her challenges as an orator and as a communicator, and in part it was about what people wanted to cover, right? There was no media of that, and I've had 1,000 million conversations over the course of this campaign about how she never talked about jobs, she never talked about this policy, and I'm like, no, she really did all day, every day, but it didn't get out there.
Be very pessimistic and Darth Vader.
Yeah.
That's kind of your mood.
I mean, and this is just comes off of the reporting I just did. Obviously, like the Obamas ran this very, as you said, this sort of appeal to nostalgia. That in many ways, as far as I'm concerned, like if you do like a straight fact, just was not true, right? But I thought some of this is like the limits boy, I can't believe I'm gonna say this. The limits of electoral politics. I'm not particularly convinced that at this point in the country's history, that it's ready to hear a message that's not nostalgic. In fact, like when I look at the long history of politicians, even when I look at the long history of activists, Martin Luther King appealed to nostalgia. I mean, so what is the message that does not in some way say America is great? Like does not say America and great. What is that message? Like how do you actually, and maybe it's that you don't start at electoral politics. Maybe it's that the project is, much longer. But if you're talking over the next 5 or 10 years, I wonder how you do that without some reification of like the basic nobility of America.
But part of it too, I think, has to do with like, this, the thing you're talking about, so play out the thought experiment, like talking to Trump voters about cap childcare costs, right? Like I think the thing that is missing from that and was really present in the Donald Trump message and relates to nostalgia is the way this all connects to senses of place. So like you can be poor or rich or middle class. Well, let's say you can be affluent or comfortable or struggling or poor in places that are booming or dying. Right? So there are people in Houston. Houston's my favorite example in this election. Barack Obama won the county around Houston by 900 votes, and Hillary Clinton won it by 150,000. Not Austin, Houston, okay? Now what's happening in Houston? Houston's booming. Houston's doing well as a place, okay? Now inside that place, there are people of all different kinds of economic strata, education levels. It's a pretty diverse place, etc. The places where she got her clock cleaned are places that are doing poorly, places. And she lost in those places among all sorts of different levels. And I think that the difference between the story that Donald Trump literally told a story, which was a ridiculous story, that I will come and wave a magic wand and make this place, not your childcare costs, not I'm gonna make this place sprout and grow and be what it was again as a place, as a thing, as blood and soil, and not as all the things you're saying, which are true, about what Hillary's message was, which is right.
This was the coal country thing too.
Exactly.
That thing that she said in coal country
That's
that she got in so much
example.
trouble for was she said the coal, and she said it inartfully. She said your coal jobs are never coming back. She said exactly this. There's no, but she was telling the truth. And then the next thing she was offering was like
the wind turbines.
A 500-point plan for what she was going to do to change, to produce new opportunity, schools, healthcare, all this stuff, great stuff for coal country, better than anybody else had talked about what could we do here.
Tens of billions of dollars.
Billions of dollars that she wanted to give to this community. But because exactly as you say, she didn't frame it as we're gonna take a return to the past, but rather the past is done. Here are my ideas about how you could successfully move into the future and change. That was not only roundly rejected, but even the media. I mean, the media actually failed in that instance tremendously without question by just reporting the part about we're going to kill all your jobs.
Right. Wait, can I just really quickly, this is a pet peeve that I just have to get in. The worst part about watching this, it was true in the coal country comment, it was true with the deplorables, is you can't, as a media figure, on one hand, repeat this narrative of somebody being a liar and never talking straight and not really being direct with people, and then when they tell the truth, attack them for bad politics. It was like the worst thing. And I'm far from the biggest Clinton defender. I'm definitely not. But watching that, I mean, as a journalist, it just felt like complete and total malpractice. You know what I mean? It's an incentive to lie. It's basically saying, be a better liar.
Right.
Like,
No, but that was the message of a lot of the critique of Clinton.
I think that's politics, though. So here's the question I have that comes from the question that you asked, and it's really troubling me. I really believe that the image that America has of itself is an image that was forged by two, at least in the 20th century, by two major events. One was World War II and the role that we played in defeating fascism in Europe, where we gathered ourselves to join powers to fight a war across the sea.
Get ready for the sequel.
Right, come on, you've seen all the movies, okay. So that was one thing. The second thing is actually the civil rights movement.
Yeah, totally.
In which America was compelled to confront itself by people who were a small percentage of a small percentage, as Taylor Brandt says, right? This wasn't like the majority of black people rose up and joined the civil. This was like 1% of the 12%, right? And confronted the country not with guns or rocks, but with songs and marching and a kind of moral power. And America allowed itself to be shamed. Like, I mean, and I say that because, you know, you could just wipe them out, right? That something happened in a very brief period. And out of those two events came the narrative about America, a place of equality, opportunity, justice, rule of law. I mean, these weren't all things you could say in 1953 when we had legal apartheid, right? This happened after that. So there's this image of America that I think is measurable and maybe even should be economically quantified. You know, when a businessman goes abroad, you know, and says, I'm the American businessman, it carries with it the idea of money, but also like a formed democracy with the rule of law and with equality and a set of values. And we gave that to America. I just want to say that wasn't free. That was given with the blood, the sweat, the tears, the lives of people who sacrificed their lives. And I would have to say, Ta-Nehisi, not for a nostalgic vision, but for a vision of the future. That's what King was talking about, was could we make it this place where the crooked would be made straight and so forth? It didn't exist. So that people were invested in that. The Trump election for me feels like, and maybe it's exactly what you said, Chris, people just don't care about that anymore. They don't care about the World War II thing. I mean, the story yesterday, we were just talking about this in a meeting, was about Kanye visiting Trump Tower on a day when Aleppo was in ruins, on a day when the new UN Secretary General was sworn in. Anybody know the name? I mean, this is what was happening on the day when the top story was about Kanye visiting. So we've kind of given up that role, and at a period of time when we've essentially moved the velvet rope from explicit racism, something that had been a taboo. Implicit racism, have it all you want. But explicit racism, there was a little velvet rope across it, and now that's been removed. And so I'm just really wondering about, like, what's America invested in? What's the character? What do people think is the character of America?
Do you think that people were unaware of just how fragile that sort of vision, I mean, because you're describing a vision that's a generation old,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
And maybe we got overconfident and complacent about it.
There was that Times article about this sort of comparative data across different democracies. How important is it to live in a democracy, which has been on the decline. I've actually seen some interesting sort of responses to the paper that say it's not quite as bad as the authors say. But you know, I do think, in this really broad sense, to go back even further to the first of those foundational stories for what modern America thinks of, which is the defeat of fascism in World War II, through this kind of, you know, statist communitarian struggle that touched every aspect of American life. I do think that a big part of what happened with these norms is that we're just, this is gonna sound really dark, but like, people in 1910, 1908, if you go back and read that period, like, they thought they'd figured it out. Like, that the global order was stable, that like, the peace had endured. There had been Crimea and there have been some stuff there, but since the Napoleonic Wars, like, they basically had it figured out. And like, if you look at global trade flows, they were extremely high. It would take a very long time to get back to what those global trade flows were as a sort of percentage of economic activity. And then things fall apart, entropy comes back, and people forget the lessons of civilization, and darkness descends and fascism and war. And I think, I mean, this is super dark, I get it, but
No, it's true. It's not dark.
but I agree. Like, I do think, like, in a weird way, I do think part of it, and I actually think there's part of it is the global order that has been constructed by this generation's version of the people that constructed that global order and the global order post-World War I that produced Versailles and then Weimar and then Nazism, that we do not have the tangible recollection of fascism in this country, nor the tangible recollection of Jim Crow in its explicit, violent evil and all its sort of, and that really, it is partly the remove from that allows those norms, because we forgot kind of why they were there in the first place and what they were set up against.
I think black folks have that.
Yeah, no, that, yeah.
I mean, remind me of like Jim Crow, like how bad it can get. I mean, you know, you can go talk to me. I mean, I have.
Yeah, that was my mother's generation.
Yeah, I mean, there was no law. I mean, they can really actually recall, you know, that sort of lawlessness.
But we also voted for Hillary.
Right, yeah.
I mean,
Right. And
95%.
that's the other thing to remember, right, is that we are talking about the failure of this, and this is, it's silly to get into the popular vote versus electoral vote game, and there are a million reasons to not talk about it, but we do need to point out that 2.5 million more Americans, 2.8 million more Americans,
But who's counting? Yes.
voted not to go in that direction.
Right,
I mean, this is real. We can't lose that, actually, because I do think, and I think there are a million reasons to despair. Like, really. I mean, really. But I don't, in our despair, which is, we have to reckon with this. Like, this is bad. Bad. It's not joke bad. It's not distant bad. One of the things that I think has happened that permits us to forget this stuff is our remove from things. And I'm not like, this is not like, there's too much irony, but like, we have become distant from our own realities, our own recent histories, right? So, yes, I mean, this is one of the things that's remarkable. I write about abortion policy. Roe was 1973. Go home, ask your mothers and your grandmothers about the people who lived in an era of illegal abortion. This is not even grandparents' generation. This is your mothers. And we have lived memories of this. And yet we have permitted ourselves to forget about what it actually means to have.
But I just want to. I do want to note that, not to get too meta, the irony that like we are now all engaging in nostalgia for the last 15 minutes.
No, I'm not.
Right?
But I'm about to not, because what I want to say is that, like, so I take the issue of like voter suppression. I'm not being nostalgic. Like, this is how that's why I spent election day in Alabama. Because that's how black people in Alabama live, and Texas live, and maybe not New York and California, but the reality of being denied the ability to participate fully in the political process. It's also true, it's a story about their grandparents and their parents and dogs and so forth, but when they're standing on the line for 6 hours, it's their story. So there is a segment of the population.
And that's true of women with
That's
abortion.
true of
in
abortion
Texas right
all
now.
over the
In
country,
Texas.
yeah.
So I do think we should, I mean, part of it is kind of harnessing that and turning loose that reality. I mean, I'm in struggle with this all the time. I just was in a conversation yesterday where people were saying, well, we got to go back to the local, and because in New York this, and then in California this, and then in New York this, and then in California this. Every time we talk about the local, we talk about New York and California. Brian Stevenson always says, okay, what are we going to do in Alabama? So 52% of black people still live in the South.
Yep.
And the truth is, the Democratic Party that tells all these stories doesn't have a story for how to unlock the oppression under which many of those people live. We're all sitting here looking at North Carolina going, what in the hell? Every day North Carolina is like a new crazy story of anti-democratic activity, right? And we're just kind of watching it. Those are people living it. That's not nostalgia. They're living in that. Have been.
Right, so the question to me, right, and I think this is such an important point, like when you say like 52% of African Americans are living in the South, it's like huge swaths of the country the Democrats have no power in, right? And the question of like what it would look like to have a genuine, I'm not even saying like empower the Democrats, I'm saying vibrant two-party democracy. That's all I'm saying, all right? A vibrant two-party democracy in the huge swaths of the country that do not have vibrant two-party democracy I don't know if it requires organizing, if it requires whatever, but it requires something then different than now. And the moral imperative for that is that the result of not having it is what we're seeing in Texas abortion laws, and what we're seeing in voting rights in the South, and what we're seeing in Medicaid expansion, which has millions of people who are in the South, poor, black and white, dying without health insurance because of out of literal spite. Literal spite, rejecting free money because it has, in some vague sense, Barack Obama's name attached to it.
Right. I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to open it to the audience. But and this kind of follows from both what you guys are talking about and what Ta-Nehisi said earlier about maybe the answers outside of electoral politics. Is the Democratic Party, as it's currently constituted, the vehicle for the kind of change that we're talking about? And where do people who are, to the left of Donald Trump, where do they find at this point, the vitality to move forward? I mean, considering the seeming condition of the Democratic Party right now.
I don't, I was listening to Rebecca make this point about the difference in the, popular vote versus the electoral vote, and I mean, it's so tragic. I mean, why do we have an electoral college in the first place, right? I mean, and no, I'm not saying that we should get rid of it, but part of why we have an electoral college is because the country was founded on slavery.
To get this result is why we have the electoral college.
It is like, it's the past actually reaching out, you know what I mean? Something that, was done, literally centuries ago, reaching out, to snatch us back. that points to something systemic. That points to something deeper in the bedrock. I think the Democratic Party is probably the vehicle for survival, for making it through, you know what I mean, for getting by. And that's not, to be dismissed. I mean, these are very, very real lives. But if you're talking about the kind of long-term, maybe I'm speaking out of school here, but I tend to think if you're talking about the kind of long-term reform that some of us would like to see, if you're talking about, God, I mean, I'm just going to say this, the ability to save the planet from global warming, you might need something more. You might need something a little more.
Yeah, word.
When I first became a civil rights lawyer and first worked at the organization that I lead now, I was a young baby lawyer, and I went down to begin to be a voting rights attorney. So this is 1988 to 93. And this was just as the change was happening. The southern states were all Democratic, not just 1964, but like in 1979 and 80, right? About 80 was when the change began to happen. So there were a lot of, powerful former governors and so forth who were Democrats in the South. And we sued Democrats all the time in voting rights. We sued Bill Clinton in a voting rights case when he was governor of Arkansas. So I never saw that issue, like the issue of voter suppression, which is about, what ability you have to determine your future, as being about, like, are you lined up with the Democratic Party? Because they were engaged in, vote dilution and so forth as well. But if you look at, it's interesting because I've been looking back at the case that Jeff Sessions brought against the Marion 3 African-American voters in Alabama in the late 1980s. And Albert Turner, one of the defendants in that case, they were later acquitted, but this was a real case of a witch hunt against these 3 black voting activists. And Albert Turner said, the whole point of voting was, it wasn't about elites, even elite black people. It was about people having the right to have a say in their future. That's how he described it. He's not Democrats, not Republicans, that the whole point, and he had been a lieutenant to, and his wife had been a lieutenant to Martin Luther King, and he had been a voting activist in Alabama for a really long time. That's how he described it, and that's what kind of animates me always. It's like, what's the vehicle that's going to allow people to have a say, a meaningful say, in their lives and their future? So for me, it's like, whatever is that vehicle, right? And I'm now really focused on people who don't have a voice and focused on the most marginalized and frankly focused on black people. What is the vehicle for that? And that's kind of the space in which I work, less than in the partisan space. Nevertheless, I have to agree with Ta-Nehisi, certainly at this moment, the position that the Republican Party, especially led by President-elect Trump, have staked out is very explicitly, if you follow this campaign, I'm not telling tales out of school, I'm not being partisan. This is the candidate himself who said the things he said about black people and what do they have to lose. This is the candidate himself who said the things that he said about Mexicans. This is the candidate himself who said the things he said about sexual assault. So the position that they're staking out is a position that actually threatens survival. And that is really turning a dynamic about the Democratic Party into a kind of intense question about, do they have the stuff to do the thing that you're suggesting, to be the vehicle through which people can really live their lives? And I think it remains to be seen. Maybe at the local level, maybe there are some places. At the national level, I think there's a fair bit of trauma that the party's going through right now.
I just quickly, I would say that I think parties, I think we may be in the midst of sort of an interesting realignment moment. And I'm sort of curious to see how much it plays out with geographically, different constituencies, ideologically. I thought all the trade stuff from Trump, Trump's great gift to the Republican Party was basically taking 30 years of kind of Reagan-esque rhetoric about both freedom and kind of markets and just saying, like, no one believes that bullshit, like, forget that. And it's true, and it turned out the base didn't really care about it either. They were just like, who gets what?
Yeah.
And who stands up for people like me? I don't need to hear some story about, like, how great freedom is and how the market was gonna figure out, like, who's the most, like, no, I don't want that story. And I think that you have an interesting moment of possible realignment, and I've been very immersed in Reconstruction reading right now, and I'm just struck by how similar in many ways the Republican Party of 1876 is to the Democratic Party of 2016. And the reason that 140-year span is interesting is because the last time we had a spread of the Electoral College and the popular vote was that election in 1876 between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden, in which the Republican wins, even though gets beat at the ballot box in the popular vote. It's the end of Reconstruction is what produces basically that victory. But there's so much to learn from the Republican Party of 1876 that broke apart and ushered in a 100-year reign of darkness, okay? And one of the things to learn about it is that that party was both the party of racial justice and racial equality, opposition to the worst, most violent forms of white supremacism, and also the party of the coastal elites, the Eastern establishment, the president of Harvard University, big business, and the New York Times.
Right.
And it turned out that coalition couldn't hold together in the face of what it stood in the face of the ferocity of the backlash. And every election that happened during that period, in 1874, the party of Southern white supremacy starts winning congressional seats in places like Maine. And people are looking around, they're like, what is going on? And it's the moment of election night of the blue wall falling. It's the moment of, wait a second. They're voting for Democrats in Maine. Like, this coalition is coming unglued before our eyes. And I think that's a real question about what this Democratic coalition is right now, particularly when you think of it not in the presidential sense, but in the stats I said before about 1,000 state legislatures, like 17 governorships. Like, what does that coalition look like, and how is it cemented together demographically and ideologically?
I also want to say something about the direction of the Democratic Party, right? So I'm somebody, I have always voted Democratic. When it comes to presidential elections, I have always been very far to the left in terms of what my goals and ideals are to every candidate I've ever pulled a lever for or filled in a box for. And one of the interesting things that I've noted about the critique of the Democratic Party, which is valid in all of these structural ways, especially the hollowing out of the Democratic Party on state and local levels, all this is really true. I think the mismanagement of the Democratic Party over the past couple of years, all of this is really true. But I want to talk about some of the directional stuff that just happened in a positive way, because for me, as a 41-year-old in the United States, so, you know, I have lived watching the Democrats that I voted for enthusiastically center white voters and white male voters in a variety of ways, right? So I watched what happened to Michael Dukakis when he was portrayed as being too left and too soft on crime. And a Willie Horton ad was used against him and setting back the criminal justice movement by at least a decade. And then I watched Bill Clinton be the guy who got the voters we're talking about right now, right? Bill Clinton was the president who persuaded the working class white voters who are now everybody's talking about. Bill Clinton left the campaign trail in 1992 to execute Ricky Ray Rector, who is a cognitively disabled black man in Arkansas. He dressed down Sister Souljah in an effort to comfort the voters we still consider the most important voters in this country. And if this post-election period doesn't remind you that we still consider white male votes to be more important than any other kind of votes in this country, like, we still obsess about the original voters in this country more than anybody else, okay? And I'm not saying that's not, there are strategic reasons we're doing that right now, but that's how Bill Clinton comforted them. I've seen similar things in terms of women. I've seen the Democratic Party, including Hillary Clinton and John Kerry after 2004, run away from abortion rights and start saying we don't need to. The whole party strategically started running Democrats who were anti-abortion. And that was to win seats, right? And that's actually how we got such a protracted and ugly fight over health care reform in the Congress, because we had a Congress full of Democrats.
Bart Stupak.
Right. Stupak Pitts, who didn't want to pass stuff that would support and enable women to get reproductive health care. Hillary Clinton herself in 2008 ran against Barack Obama talking about hardworking white people, right? It wasn't that, so when I'm going to say this good thing about Hillary Clinton, and it really, I never thought, Hillary Clinton, I've written about her for many years, critically and often appreciatively and admiringly. I never thought when she got into this race, I imagined that what she would do is move straight to the center, not unusually like what all Democrats do, right, in my lifetime, that she would move to the center, that she would reassure the white voters, she would recenter white male voters, and I can't tell you what it was like. It was thrilling. When I thought there was a chance, I never was sure she would win, ever. I was nervous the whole time. Chris can tell you, I was basket case. But right up till the end, and then I really got convinced she was going to win, so my teeth got kicked out. But watching a race where she didn't cede policy ground either. She ran on the most progressive economic platform of my lifetime. Okay? She ran on paid leave. She ran on subsidized childcare. Her economic team was aces, man. I've been talking to them since the election. They were going to redefine infrastructure as including both the physical infrastructure jobs, the highways and bridges that we need repaired, and the care infrastructure of childcare and elder care. This is revolutionary economic ideas. Probably would have gotten nowhere in an obstructionist Congress. But these ideas were ideas that I have dreamed of. And she didn't give ground on them. 3 weeks before the election, or a month before the election, she puts out a fix on poverty. Now, it was mostly a minor rollback of damage that was done during welfare reform, but better, right, that we try to undo that damage than that we don't. And when she said deplorables, and I know now, a million very smart people have explained to me that this was the terrible strategic error, or one of them. I love deplorables. You know why? Because it was true, and it was the opposite of Sister Soldier. It was the opposite of Sister Soldier.
Basket, because that sounded so shallow.
Okay, right, okay, fair.
I didn't get that. I just didn't understand it.
The problem is Donald Trump said much worse.
Of course.
Like even if you think,
course,
even if people think it's a strategic mistake, I just feel like, sorry, go ahead.
But it was just, I mean, this was by many measures, you know, and just write it off because I'm an old corporate identitarian, Hillary shill, whatever. But I was so excited and surprised, not just that it was Hillary doing this stuff, but that it was a Democrat running progressively and unshyly that she gave. Now, she didn't talk a ton about abortion during the general, but then in the third debate, in a discussion over late-term abortion, which let me tell you, every politician I have ever met, and certainly one going into a general presidential election, runs for the doors when somebody starts talking not just about abortion, but late-term abortion. Hillary Clinton gave the most full-throated defense of reproductive autonomy that I have ever heard a mainstream politician give, and that was 3 weeks before an election. And so I don't want, the thing that I'm worried about with the diagnostics, and you know, we should have centered these people more, we should have done this, let's look at how people won. Well, Bill Clinton won, okay? And I worry, the thing I want to say as far as the Democratic Party and moving forward is I want to do that again, and that's the worst thing you can say because it didn't work. But I want that again. I don't want to go back to Ricky Ray Rector and we think abortion is terrible. Or we can find common ground with people who want to outlaw it for everyone, right? Like, I don't want that. And so when I think about can the Democratic Party be a vehicle going forward that is useful and that in fact brings people, more of the people who vote for it in, that's something I want to keep in mind going forward. I want more of what we just saw, even though it didn't work.
Oh, she got more votes. All right, so, excuse me. We do have time for a few questions. And maybe we'll start on this side of the room. There's, I think, someone right there. And if you could keep them kind of pithy, because we don't have a huge amount of time.
It was sweet.
All right, will do. Aaron Coleman, NYU Journalism. I wanted to ask a question to Mr. Coates primarily. So with Dr. King and the Albany movement, we know it wasn't successful because the sheriffs were too nice. But then when he had Bull Connor in Birmingham, it worked. So I wondered if the same kind of dynamic could be at play with a more stark character in President Trump.
Wait, I'm sorry, it could be more, I missed the last part of the question.
Like, does Trump provide the kind of Bull Connor opportunity since it's more stark, since it's no longer implicit, but like explicit?
Well, I think one of the big differences is that, and this is often missed in comparisons, there's not a moment that I know of, and I may be wrong about this, Sherrilyn, but there's not these huge moments of African-American progress that are absent white national interests being threatened. Okay, so there's no way of understanding the emancipation of 4 million African-Americans in this country if you don't understand that the very fabric of the nation itself was threatened. I want to make that absolutely clear because people often say, well, you could have just let the South walk and then, you know, the North. No, you couldn't have just let the South walk because then any other state would have walked. You would not have had a United States of America. Absent the craziness of the slaveholders, and maybe I'm making your case here, in fact, but absent the craziness of the slaveholders, you know, who knows when emancipation happens. The same thing for the civil rights movement. it's tough to imagine the progress made during the civil rights movement without the presence of the Cold War and without World War II. This exterior force, it wasn't just simply, that Martin Luther King and folks stood up and said, the story we tell is this moral appeal. It just appealed to the goodness of white people's hearts, and then everything was okay. That's not actually what happened. You have Russians. You have, folks during the Vietnam War, saying, listen, you run around talking about democracy called, and you are lynching Negroes. That's what they, used to say, about America. Robert F. Kennedy, when he's talking about the Freedom Riders, he's talking about how much of an embarrassment this is in an international situation. The question I would ask today is there that countervailing force that's around? Is that actually present, in a way that would cause folks to, hear a Dr. King or hear, the kind of messages? It wasn't simply that Dr. King was singularly great. It was the time in which he arrived. And what scares me today, and I would happily be wrong about this, is that there may not be a countervailing force, that there may not be that big sort of exterior, national interest that can be appealed to, that's present, that would allow for, some sort of success. So I'm not sure that it would be.
Sherrilyn, you I know mentor some younger activists who've been working around Black Lives Matter and other movements. Do you see in those movements potential in the Trump administration or new potential to make any kind of advancement, or do you think this might mark the end of those movements?
No, I don't think it will be the end of those movements. So first of all, I want to, people should go and read Derek Bell for the interest convergence theory that Ta-Nehisi was talking about.
This is not mine.
And no, because I think that although it doesn't exist right now, the exterior thing you're talking about, eventually one comes. We don't know how long we're going to be.
It's not an argument for not struggling.
No,
that's not
exactly. So one will come.
No.
But I look, we don't know what's going to happen with the Trump administration around some things. Here's what worries me. When a candidate talks about law and order in the way in which he talks about law and order, right? I've been advancing this, argument that if you are a law and order president or a law and order attorney general, as Jeff Sessions thinks that he may be, then you have to recognize that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is a law, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is a law, the Clean Water Act is a law, the Fair Housing Act of 1968 is a law. These are all laws to be enforced. You don't get to pick and choose, and it just means that you arrest protesters. But that being said, I think that the image that Trump has put out there about being a law and order president and the appeal to a certain part of the demographic is about that disorder that Chris was talking about that made him uncomfortable. When you look at the list of the items that the Fraternal Order of Police, who endorsed Donald Trump, wants in the first 100 days, the first thing is we want the military weapons back that we had on the street in Ferguson, So I do think that I don't think that young people protesting, and whether they're formally within the Black Lives Matter movement or in other movements, is going to stop. It's not going to stop. The question is, how is the state going to respond? And that's the area in which I've had a fair amount of anxiety and take quite seriously, because I believe, and what has been really heartening to me is how many people, especially older African Americans, including very wealthy ones, who've been, once the election happened, who've been saying, those young people have to be protected. What are you going to do to protect those young people? So I think there is a strong sense of the need for protection, for young people engaged in protest. But the truth is, we don't know how the state is going to respond. But we have reason to worry. And that means that that's part of the preparation we have to be doing now. It's not the kind of thing that you can turn on a dime, one night while the tank's rolling down the street. Right. You have to be prepared. And so there are lots of conversations happening about what that preparation looks like.
Great. Now maybe someone in the center, maybe our microphone handlers can find someone for us.
Hello? Right.
It's happening.
Right over here, up top, left-hand side. Over here, top. Balcony. Okay. So I'm glad you posed a question about, what are the young activists going to do, because that's what I wanted to follow up with. So, when we think about these like social crises that we've had over the past 100, 200 years, even in the last 5 or 10 years, there's always been a reaction by young people to be organized, whether it was Occupy Wall Street, the Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter, like my generation elevated Bernie Sanders. And so I think with whatever Trump's gonna bring, I think my generation is gonna be the generation that's gonna be at the forefront. And we're also seeing it with the Women's March that's being led by young women of color, 3 young women of color that are organized out of New York City. And one of the diagnoses that was criticized after Trump won was this thing around identity politics, which my generation embraces and we think is something that we should really value and look to. So one of the questions that I have for all of you is, what is that organizing framework or pedagogy or way of thinking that my generation should be looking to and really hold on to? I think identity politics is something that we embrace. I think something else something that I really aspire about the Black Lives Matter movement is centralizing like Black feminism, and that also seems to be under attack. This issue of or this way of thinking about like intersectionality and how that's being co-opted by white feminists. So my question to you is, our generation is definitely going to push back and fight back. What is that organizing framework that we should be at the forefront leading with?
Okay, yes, please.
I would say, I think you identify something really important, which is people have different roles. The metaphor I always use in this situation is a football metaphor. Maybe it doesn't work, but on kickoff coverage, you're trained to run down and stay in your lane and not chase the ball, because if everyone chases the ball, that's how you create the conditions for a huge run back, right? So even if the ball's over there, and you're at the 50 and the 40, and you're I can tackle them, it's stay, and do your thing, because as a whole, you want the whole field covered, right? And to your point, you like that? Okay, good. So to your point, it's when I'm talking about what is the Democratic Party's message in Mahoning County, that's not your job, right? You shouldn't and I say that because this gets confused in the punditry all the time when writers use their platforms to tell activists what they should be doing.
That's right.
It's not you should organize around what you want to organize around. It's other people's job to convince folks in this sort of raw political tactical sense. In terms of organizing principles, I don't have anything to offer because I'm not an organizer, and nothing drives me crazier than writers telling organizers how to organize.
Yeah. I mean, just to really quickly piggyback. I mean, there's this incredible literature that's developed over the past years, and maybe this happens all the time, about what Black Lives Matters is doing wrong. Yeah. And I'm like, what the hell do you know? You know what I mean? What the hell do you know? I mean, as far as I can see, they have centered a discussion about police violence that has been going on for time immemorial. I am pundits sitting back in their office, writers like me, sitting back in their office, who are not, doing any sort of reporting, instructing Black Lives Matter on it's just the most annoying sort of thing in the world. As far as I'm concerned, and this goes back to your point. You guys kind of got it. It should not be missed in this over-analysis, the actual successes. I have been thinking about police violence. I mean, I just can get on my hobby horse for a second. Since my buddy was killed 16 years ago, and there was no movement. There was no one in the streets. There was no conversation. There was no, police department talking about, hey, we need to track violence different. There was no presidential, panels put together. I mean, so to some extent, you guys have to acknowledge your own successes here. You know what I mean? And build from there.
And there has to be humility. I mean, look, I'm a civil rights lawyer, and as I say all the time to my staff, we have organizers on our staff who work with local communities, but our job was to go and get Martin Luther King out of jail in Americus, Georgia, not tell Martin Luther King what he should organize. So even we are aware of our role. In 2013, we filed a brief in the Supreme Court in a case that I thought was going to be the case that was going to bring police violence into the fore. This young man, Robbie Tolan, had been shot on his driveway. He was driving a very expensive car in a suburb of Texas, and the police followed him to his driveway. He got out of the car. He's like, I live here with my parents. His parents came out. They're like, that's my son. We live here. The police called back up, and within 30 seconds, he was shot. Now, he survived. But I thought that this was going to be the case that was going to center the issue of police violence, which we had worked on for years, Why? Because Robbie Tolan was a Major League Baseball player, and his father had been a Major League Baseball player. I'm assuming most people here have never heard of Robbie Tolan. It didn't happen. It didn't happen with our amicus brief. It didn't happen with the litigation. Ben Crump was involved. It didn't happen until Mike Brown was killed, right? And this is after Trayvon Martin, which really kind of set it off, right? And then Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson. And that was something that then young people expressed their outrage. So even for the issues that we work on, we also have to be flexible enough to respond to the moment. You talked about the moment of civil rights and how things happen nationally, even internally. Sometimes it's just an alchemy that event leads to event, and something about it all brings it together, and then it sings, and then you have to be ready in that moment. Right. So I don't think, even as a civil rights lawyer, it's my job to tell you what the framing is. I know what the framing is for the issues that I work on, for myself, for my own work, and for the work of my organization. But I expect that I'm going to get pulled in directions that I didn't expect to get pulled in, right, because young people or other people are going to be doing something that's fantastic that maybe I wasn't even ready for. And I think so there has to be humility in this as well.
That's an excellent point.
I also think that you brought up, in citing Occupy, Black Lives, and the upcoming Women's March, you bring up a really interesting point about the future of activism, because people of our generation, and probably me myself, have written over the past 15 years, and lots of people have observed, oh, we're in a different time of activism now. We gather online. Now we organize differently. We're past the period of marches and physical gathering. But the fascinating thing is that I think your generation, through these kinds of assemblies, are proving that, in fact, to be not true. So Occupy got noticed because people gathered physically in the square. The Ferguson protests, Black Lives Matter.
Coda Pipeline just recently.
Totally.
That's right,
Yes.
that's right.
Physical
That's
presence.
right.
Absolutely. And that's why something like, I've been told, writing about the women's movement for years, and it's interesting because I learned about illegal abortion and coat hangers when I was 15 years old and went to a 1989 reproductive rights march in Washington. That stuff is still really powerful, and I myself have spent the past 10 or 12 years talking about, we don't do that anymore. That's just not how things happen. And in part, I wonder if some of that analysis wasn't also making excuses for the fact that for a long time it just wasn't happening. And now it is, thanks to these movements that have in part decided that various new forms of physical gathering and bringing people into public spaces to show that they are people who are objecting to something is actually a very, very, very powerful form of protest, and that is a lesson that your generation has taught its elders.
So Chris, can I ask you a question? Because just based on the thing you were saying, how no one should tell anyone else how to protest. Those people you talked to in Ohio, were you with Bernie Sanders?
No, Wisconsin.
Do you feel like those people were in any way antagonized by the sight of protests?
Yeah. Yes.
Do you think that there is a cost electorally?
Totally, yes. I will tell you something. I don't think I've ever said this in public.
Oh, this better be good.
You're
You're on TV every night.
I know. Just between us.
Not
Keep it
anymore.
in the room. No, there was a moment where I was it actually relates to a point Rebecca made about being sort of amazed by how unpandering the Clinton campaign was in certain ways. And there was a moment where I was in Philadelphia, and I had gotten lost in trying to find where I was supposed to be in the convention, and I ended up in some weird little nook in the arena, way high up, and I was trying to find my way, and there was the Mothers of the Movement on stage. And I kind of got brought up short because I hadn't realized they were going to be on, and then all of a sudden I started listening to them, and I had two thoughts. One, I found it amazingly moving. And the other thought in the back of my head was like, I kind of hope white America isn't watching this. And by that I mean, I am not confident this is playing well politically. And I honestly think that if you look at the Donald Trump RNC speech, when he talks about the protests, if you looked at Fox News' coverage of protests, like if you go back and you read the Nixon speech in '68, yeah, there's probably a political cost. Like backlash is a real thing, and I think there was an activating energy that came for folks of seeing BLM, seeing.
It was a backlash to emancipation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just it's a sort
of the cost of
political law of physics. That does not mean. I mean, I think what ends up happening is people say, and I think some of them are motivated by perfectly good intentions. They'll like, maybe don't do that, and like, and I don't know what to do with that impulse, right? When I say that, like, that I haven't said that in public because it feels like a weird feeling to have when you're listening to people share the worst grief and the most sort of keening forms of injustice possible, to have that political thought in your head of like, how is this playing? But yeah, I do think that part of the backlash we saw, and Donald Trump was in a unique position to capitalize on it, was some backlash to this era of protest. I think that's a real thing, and I think I heard voters say it to me. I heard voters say it to me.
Were those voters who would have, do you think, voted Democratic under against?
I think some of them probably were. I think some of them probably were. I mean, I don't mean specifically the Trump voters I was talking to in Kenosha, because I don't want to like speak for them.
Right.
But yeah, I think that was absolutely a factor in the campaign.
But that's always true. I can't think of any election cycle in which, whether it was during the Civil Rights Movement or anti-war, protests in 1970 and 71, that it made people, that it didn't make voters uncomfortable. There wasn't some backlash, some cost to be paid, whether it was the election of Richard Nixon or whatever, that it is supposed to actually, that's the thing.
Right.
It's actually supposed to be destabilizing. It is supposed to convict you. It is supposed to make you uncomfortable. It is supposed to make you have the reaction that I think many voters have, which is that they want order,
Yeah.
And that's why it's so transgressive in a way.
That's right.
Because even knowing that, right, it has this incredible power. So I just think that's the cost of.
And you think the net is that it's effective toward?
Well, it depends on when you measure the net.
Right.
Yeah, and also, do you, Sherrilyn? I mean,
Right, and also, like,
the
there
question
is-
I would ask is like, what's the other choice?
Right.
Like, what's the option? I mean, the option is everybody, sort of stay home, and it's okay that Michael Brown's body laid out in the street like that. Don't grieve like that. You watch Eric Garner choke to death, on camera. That's fine. You watch Walter Scott get gunned down, running from a police officer, and you say, that's okay. That's okay. I mean, you can't, like this, it becomes existential. Any other human community would have a reaction to that.
Right.
And so any sort of expectation that black people will not react, I mean, it's just, I mean, when those are the lines on which you're operating, you're in trouble already.
Right. Absolutely. Rebecca, were you going to say something?
No, I
She's
was
in
just
trouble.
no, I was just going to say we've gone to such great pains to understand why the white community reacted the way they did to their setbacks, right? They just voted for a man who defies and blows up all the norms and the ethics, and who, confesses to sexual predation and wants to build a wall and describes black communities as hellscapes and rates women on scales of 1 to 10 and calls people pigs and dogs and mocks physical disability. And we are, we all are thinking about what provoked this behavior, and yet it is so difficult for us to think similarly about what provokes protest. Right? Guess what? This was white people's protest.
Right.
This is White Lives Matter.
Right.
No, this election is that. That's what this is. And we're working to understand. Right? Well, look, they have lost status. There's resentment. The industries are closing. Like we're compassionately thinking about this, but we never apply, or very rarely, or too rarely apply, or when we do apply it. That was the other thing about that Democratic convention. It was Mothers of the Movement, and then that last night where I was very uncomfortable about some of the like USA, USA, and then I realized, and I think Jamel has written about this, Jamel Bowie at Slate wrote about this beautifully at the time. They put up all these signifiers of American power and authority. The army, the generals, the cops, like all the, but the cast that they chose were immigrants, Khizr Khan as the image of the military enforcement, right? It was this, in some ways, this like jingoistic American USA tableau of American authority. And it was cast entirely with people who, in fact, were the most vulnerable and subsidiary populations. You know, women cops, black cops. I mean, it was, and that along with the protests is what people were reacting to, and it was I don't know. I'm now going off our topic. We should get into it.
Well, I think it's interesting because just the idea of inverting the sort of way we normally talk about these things, you know, because even when people talk about identity politics, of course, the primary identity politics in this country has always been the identity of white men, and what people call identity politics is usually a response to the overarching identity politics in this country. People who've been targeted in specific ways, trying to get rights that the larger population has. Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. Yes, someone back there? And this has to be super pithy.
Yeah, I'll be quick. My name's Wade. I just have a quick question. Actually, it's probably not that quick, but. So we've talked about how essentially this election, there's been so much turmoil in the rule book being torn up, especially when it comes to Trump, but also when it comes to Bernie Sanders, him getting so popular and essentially being a democratic socialist and being proud about that. I'm wondering, do you feel that post-election, with all these rules being torn up, socialist discourse is going to begin to start entering mainstream discourse? And also, do you feel like kind of McCarthyism, Red Scare is beginning to see its dying days?
I do think that I think it would be a good time to buy stock in socialism. Like I do think that
That's a great way of putting it.
that was a joke.
You set up an alarm with that joke.
No, I do think that it's remarkable that someone who described himself as a democratic socialist did as well as he did. I do think that socialism is a term that has lost, for some of the same reasons we were talking about, sort of distance from World War II, has lost part of the associations people have with, say, Stalinism, right, which is one of the worst orderings of human society that's ever visited planet Earth. And so I think that there is a degree to which, I think also that there's a tremendous ideological exhaustion in America around kind of free markets. And I think that Donald Trump showed that like there's just no broad constituency for this certain kind of narrative that you might call sort of socialism's opposite, which is this sort of idealized version of laissez-faire, which was always kind of always honored in the breach, frankly. But the fact that it's sort of polar opposite of laissez-faire capitalism is so ideologically exhausted and has been so thoroughly rejected by the entirety of both parties in many ways, means that, yes, I do think it's a kind of, in some ways, auspicious moment for socialism, whatever that means in this context. And I think that's kind of where a lot of both the difficult political and rhetorical work happens.
Okay, one more question. And how about that hand right there? And now we've gone to ultra pithy. Yes.
Hi, good evening. I think one of the topics that's emerging from this discussion is that the big idea could be fusion politics again, some of the work that Reverend Barber is doing in North Carolina. But I guess one of my concerns is, how do we do that without minimizing racism, misogyny, the impact of that, and homophobia and xenophobia? How do we do fusion politics without forgetting that these are real issues that are impacting fusion itself? Thanks.
Excellent question.
You know, one of the things that I keep thinking about, and well, first thing I want to say is it's very, very important that I remember in 2008, and this very same panel was being convened about the conservative movement and Republicans. I think that's
right. Totally.
People were talking about the end of conservatism in the end. Yeah, in the end of the Republican Party.
That's a good point. Yeah, let's have a moment.
I mean, let's just realize I think it's important to remember the immediate past. The other, and this is not so much an answer as a question. I thought, you know, with not perfectly, but I thought that was exactly what Barack Obama did. And I think like it's really, really important to remember that he did win 2 times straight. You know what I mean? And he did go to, you know, some of the places that, you know, ultimately were lost, you know, in this election, and actually successfully campaign. So I mean, I guess this takes us back to where we started from the beginning. It's very, very important not to overanalyze too much. You know what I mean? And I think like what I fear, and I think Rebecca made this point, Chris made this point, to some extent, is that in this moment that you don't abandon core values. You know what I mean? Because those core values actually have been successful the last 2 times. You want to talk about on a presidential level. There are other things in terms of a structural critique of the Democratic Party that you can talk about, but they have been successful. They did win the popular vote.
Yeah.
They did.
In the face of all these outsized obstacles, including whether you want to talk about Russians and Comey and FBI and emails exposed. Like there were outsized and gender and race.
And your first woman candidate for president.
Yes.
I mean,
we've never done that before.
You did win the popular vote, so I think it's like really important to just remember that.
I so agree. Just let's not overdo it because we will give away our power.
Yeah,
that's right.
And I think that we should be focused on what millennials are doing and thinking about the popular vote. I do think on the fusion politics piece, we have to be real about what's happening at the state level and what's happening in redistricting. It makes everyone's eyes glaze over.
No, it's really
so boring. It's so awful, I know. But that is really how power has been solidified. And until we start creating political jurisdictions that actually are fusion jurisdictions that require different people to be together instead of having them so separately, we're not going to get to a point where we can advance that kind of politics at the local level. And as the 2020 census comes up, again, sounds boring, but really important. This is, and the redistricting that will follow in the state houses and then of the United States Congress, it's really important that people recognize how powerfully important this whole issue of redistricting is and pay attention.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to Sherrilyn, Ta-Nehisi, Rebecca, and Chris. And thank you